Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 6 p.m. here in Cairo. I'm Lubna Yahya bringing to you this news bulletin, and we start off with the headlines. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli meets African businessmen on the sidelines of his participation in the G20 on behalf of President Fattah al-Sisi. Egyptians abroad vote in the second phase of the House of Representatives elections. And the death toll reaches 33 in some of the deadliest Israeli strikes in Gaza since the ceasefire start. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli said Egypt attached a great importance to empowerment of the private sector so as to make it a main driver for economic growth and a primary partner in sustainable development. The remark came at a meeting the Prime Minister headed with the representatives of 40 major companies and think tanks in South Africa that was organized by the Egyptian Embassy in order to promote economic partnership and integration between Egypt and South Africa. The Prime Minister briefed the meeting on the business atmosphere in Egypt and welcomed the drive to push forward partnerships and investments between Cairo and Cape Town. Madbouli said Egypt looks forward to the establishment of a joint Egyptian-South African Business Council, spelling out Egypt's readiness to remove all obstacles facing the flow of South African investments into its markets. Madbouli also reviewed the state's efforts for developing infrastructure, boosting the private sector, adopting economic reforms, and providing financial incentives, key factors in the comprehensive development drive witnessed in Egypt. On the eve of his participation in the 2025 Group of 20 Summit in South Africa, Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli on Friday met officials at Anglo Gold Ashanti, the operator of Egypt's Sukari gold mine. The Prime Minister expressed appreciation for the strategic partnership with the global gold mining company and asserted his keen interest in removing any obstacles facing the company's investments in Egypt. The Prime Minister Madbouli is chairing the Egyptian delegation participating in the two-day G20 gathering in Johannesburg on behalf of President Fattah al-Sisi. Madbouli is due to participate in the summit's opening and concluding sessions. He will also engage in a session that South African President Cyril Ramaphosa dedicated to African leaders participating in the summit. Egyptian expatriates continued voting on Friday in the second phase of the House of Representatives election. Voting is held for 2 days in 139 polling stations at Egyptian diplomatic missions in 117 countries worldwide. In this second phase of the House of Elections, voters are choosing between 316 independent candidates vying for 141 individual seats, in addition to a single election list in 13 governorates, including the capital, Cairo. Voting on the first day of the vote was closed in New Zealand, the first country in which casting ballots kicked off, given its local time difference. A heavy voter turnout was particularly observed in Arab countries such as Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, along with some European countries, including France and Italy. Meanwhile, the executive chief of the National Election Authority, Ahmed bin Dari, asserted that voting in the second phase of the House of Representatives elections went smoothly and regularly at Egypt's diplomatic missions abroad. Addressing a press conference at the headquarters of the Central Operations Theater of the authority, bin Dari hailed a close coordination between the authority and the Foreign Ministry, which brought the voting process into a success. The councillor said he contacted via video conference a number of ambassadors and consuls who asserted their regularity of voting with no obstacles or breaches reported so far. Egyptian voters in the second phase governorates will take part in the House's elections 2025 on Monday and Tuesday, the 24th and 25th of this month. In addition, the runoff of the first phase of the elections will be held on December 1st and 2nd abroad and on December 3rd and 4th domestically. The Palestinian Hamas movement accused Israel of breaching the ceasefire agreement in Gaza with continuous operations aimed at expanding the area that is under Israeli military control in the Strip, in contradiction to agreed pullout maps. The group called on ceasefire mediators to press the Israeli occupation forces to stop these violations immediately. The media office in Gaza earlier said Israeli forces continue incursions into eastern parts of the northern Gaza city and are changing yellow markers used to designate Israeli-controlled areas in order to widen these areas, leading to a new displacement wave among Palestinians. Israeli strikes in the Gaza southern city of Khan Yunis killed 5 people, bringing the death toll from airstrikes in the Palestinian territory over a roughly 12-hour period to 33, mostly women and children. 4 Israeli airstrikes on tents sheltering displaced people in Khan Yunis and killed 17 people, including 5 women and 5 children. In Gaza City, 2 airstrikes on a building killed 16 people, including 7 children and 3 women. Israeli forces killed 2 Palestinian teenagers during an overnight raid on a town near Ramallah in the Israeli-occupied West Bank as violence surges in the territory with a growing number of the dead. According to the health ministry in the Palestinian Authority, occupation forces shot 2 young men in Kafr Aqab and both later died of their wounds. A Palestinian news agency reported that Israeli forces had raided Kafr Aqab overnight, deploying forces to the streets and on top of the town's buildings before opening fire. Overnight, settlers attacked communities near Nablus, setting fire to properties in Hawara and Abu Falah. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa called for extensive international efforts to stabilize the ceasefire in Gaza and to implement the UNCS resolution number 2803 in order to launch recovery and reconstruction efforts in the Palestinian enclave and to press for unhindered flow of aid. The remark was made at meetings the Palestinian official held with European officials to review field developments in Palestine on the sidelines of a donor conference in Brussels. The meetings were held at the foreign ministers of France, Spain, and Germany, as well as EU commissioners for foreign affairs and for the Mediterranean, in addition to the British Minister of Development. The European Union pressed to bolster reform of the Palestinian Authority as Brussels hosted 60 delegations to discuss reconstruction and governance in Gaza after the U.S. brokered a peace plan. The 27-nation bloc, the biggest financial backer of the Palestinians, is looking to play a more prominent role after being left largely on the sidelines of U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts to end the war in Gaza. As part of the efforts, a handful of EU countries signed contributions of more than 80 million euros, part of a broader support by the bloc worth around 1.6 billion euros over 3 years that has been already announced. Singapore will impose financial sanctions on 4 Israelis and bar them from entering the city-state, accusing them of acts of extreme violence against the Palestinians in the West Bank. The Foreign Ministry said as a firm supporter of international law and the two-state solution, Singapore opposes any unilateral attempts to change facts on the ground through acts which are illegal under international law. All 4 individuals have been previously sanctioned by the European Union. And the foreign minister also chided Israeli politicians who had spoken about annexing parts of the West Bank or Gaza, the 2 Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories, and said that the so-called E1 settlement project would fragment the West Bank. Apart from imposing sanctions, the foreign minister said Singapore would also recognize the Palestinian state under the right conditions. Lebanon's army said it is exerting great efforts to deploy its troops south of the Litani River under last year's agreement that ended hostilities with Israeli occupation forces. A statement said the Lebanese army's deployment plan is proceeding according to schedule, but condemned the Israeli enemy's insistence on violating Lebanese sovereignty. A statement was issued after Israel's military has intensified raids on Lebanon in recent weeks. Despite a U.S. brokered ceasefire last November, Israel has kept up near daily attacks on Lebanon and still maintains troops in 5 areas in South Lebanon. A Russian glide bomb slammed into a residential district in the southern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia, killing 5 people. The overnight attack, which also injured 10 people, occurred after details emerged of a U.S. plan to end the war. A Russian drone assault on the southern city of Odessa also struck a residential area during the night, injuring 5 people. The attacks came 2 days after a Russian drone and missile barrage on Ukraine's western city of Ternopil killed 31 people, including 6 children, and injured 94 others. European Union leaders and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will reach out to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to discuss a U.S. peace plan on Ukraine during the current G20 summit. Von der Leyen said on Friday that they will discuss the situation both with European leaders and with leaders on the sidelines of the G20. The United States and Russia are negotiating a 28-point roadmap to end the war in Ukraine, but Brussels has not been included in the negotiations. President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Thursday, after talks with a top U.S. Army official, that he was ready for constructive, honest, and prompt work with Washington. That's it for now, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching.